From the school shootings happening in colleges and even elementary schools across America to the slew of shootings occurring at movie theaters and malls, there seems to be an outburst of violence in society. Relevant magazine reports that since 2011, there has been a public mass shooting on average every 64 days. Now, there are many theories attempting to explain why today's casualties seem increasingly uncontrollable. Mainly, people blame poor parenting or the rise of mental disorders. However, a major argument is the open violence portrayed in today's media. With television, video games, and music containing more and more explicit content, bloodshed and fighting is an open and frequent concept in media, and Americans, particularly children, have not only become desensitized to mass violence, but have also grown to glamorize it. Sadly, these tragic events and crimes could happen in any area near you if not already. Today, I'd like to talk to you about first, the major ways violence has been integrated through society, how children are affected by it, and why the media needs to change. Now, I'll begin by telling you about how violence is integrated into television. Children spend a large part of their day watching TV. For their naive innocence and natural curiosity, children and young adults are affected most by television. Out of boredom and or a desire for entertainment, children aged 5 to 16 spend on average 6.5 hours a day in front of a TV screen. Now that's according to dailymail.com. With television becoming a bigger and bigger part of children's days, less and less of their time is spent reading and exercising, and thus they're becoming more and more engaged with their televisions. And with programs incorporating more violence into their shows for dramatism, children are seeing violence on television more and more. Just about all television channels feature programming that includes violence. Network channels have countless shows focusing on police forces as they combat criminals in city streets. Cable channels have scandalous dramas that include murders and gory killings. And in fact, even channels like Nickelodeon and Disney, companies that are dedicated to children's programming, have aired shows that include physical fights as a way to end disputes. And watching television for 25% of their day, children are viewing these violent acts on the screen a large part of their leisure time. And with the violence surrounding children in their television rooms, extensive viewing of television violence by children causes greater aggressiveness. Sometimes, watching a single violent program can increase aggressiveness. Children who view shows in which violence is very realistic, frequently repeated or unpunished, are more likely to imitate what they see. Children with emotional, behavioral, learning, or impulse control problems may be more easily influenced by TV violence. The impact of TV violence may show immediately in the child's behavior or may surface years later. Young people can be affected even when their home life shows no tendency towards violence. Now that is a direct quote from aacap.org. Children may not reflect signs of violent influence in their early years, but these violent ideals are embedded in their vulnerable minds, and over time, this violence manifests, and eventually their savagery will surface. Additionally, it is important to note that TV programming is not the only thing displayed on TV screens. Gaming systems are plugged in, and video games are seen as these television screens as well. Now, children are widely influenced by the video games they play. There are countless interactive games that feature wars, theft, and murder as a major subject. However, unlike in television shows where the killer or robber is sometimes caught and punished, the villain in a game is often unprosecuted. In fact, oftentimes the motive of the game is to steal, kill, and destroy skillfully and without being found out or punished for it. And there is a reward within the game for doing so. Children play these games, and despite the labels indicating that these games are for mature audiences and are not reflective of real-life scenarios, they still play these games, so much so that they start to see like real widely influenced by these video games. And worse than violent TV shows, children are somewhat responsible for the violence in these games because they are playing the games and guiding a character instead of just watching the drama unfold on a show. There is not just violence before television and computer screens. There is also violence through the airwaves. Music has a strong influence on children. Just as bad as watching and playing with violence, hearing violence is just as bad. The violent references made in music has drastically increased through the years. With children listening to music in car rides with friends while exercising and on leisure time, the lyrics heard through their headphones subconsciously influence their minds. And children who are extremely sensitive to violence, perhaps because violence and aggression surrounds their real-life environments, are more likely to internalize violent lyrics. According to drdouglas.org, children who are already at risk for suicide or violence may increase their risk by heavy use of music extolling those themes. However, for children without pre-existing risk factors, or for those who have a number of protective factors, music with themes of suicide or violence is likely to have a little short-term effect. There certainly could be long-term cumulative effects, but more research is needed to look for these types of long-term effects. So some children are affected by explicit songs more than others are. Nonetheless, these violent songs, whether rap or rock and roll, have some type of effect on young listeners. And with this music being popularized and integrated into mainstream media and featured in both television and video games, these violent lyrics are unescapable. Not to mention, with the internet and technology advancing the way it is, children have access to these violent television shows, video games, and music at all times. A main counter-argument for the influence of violence in the media is that parents should be more responsible for teaching their children responsibility and educating them that violence portrayed in the media should not be adopted into real life. However, children have ways to watch, play, and listen to violence without their parents ever knowing at all. With technology-savvy students figuring out ways around age restrictions or old-fashioned exposure from an older friend or relative, children are seeing explicit content their parents would most likely disapprove of more than ever. Of course, parents need to reinforce the falsities of violence, but the media should limit the harsh content they expose society to. As a result of the savage extremities embodied in today's television shows, video games, and music, Americans are becoming more and more desensitized to violence. Now, children are even absorbing the violent imagery they see and are growing to be immune to violence. How do you feel about the slew of mass shootings in society? Isn't it upsetting to say the least? And unless you want your children to grow up violent and capable of atrocious crimes, we need to pressure the media to censor their content. Adolescents are becoming accustomed to violence, and sadly now it is a reality. And unless the media starts to do a better job of censoring its content, America is not only going to face higher rates of violent acts committed by either today's youth or adults who are influenced by violence in their youth.